At the ripe old age of 21, Specialist Maya Ramirez was the unofficial queen of the motor pool at Firebase Grizzly, a dusty, sun-baked outpost in the heart of Afghanistan's Helmand province. It wasn't a throne she'd asked for, and it certainly wasn't one that came with any respect. To the hardened infantrymen and seasoned officers she shuttled around the sprawling base, she was just Wrench, the grease-stained driver of the heavily armored MRAP. They saw her slight build, the way her uniform seemed just a bit too big for her frame, and the quiet, almost shy demeanor she carried, and they dismissed her. She was their Grizzly Uber, their taxi service, a necessary but ultimately insignificant cog in the war machine. The calcine wrench itself was a backhanded compliment, a nod to her mechanical aptitude that also served to keep her firmly in the box, built for her. A glorified mechanic with a Driver S license. What none of them knew, what they never bothered to ask, was that Maya Ramirez was born and bred in the harsh, unforgiving landscape of rural Montana. Long before she could legally drive a car, she could field strip a hunting rifle in the dark. Her father, a former Marine Scout sniper, had raised her on a diet of discipline, respect for firearms, and the quiet confidence that comes from self. She could rear wind and track game with an instinct that felt ancient and deeply ingrained. She hadn't joined the army to turn wrenches and chauffeur colonels. She had joined to be a soldier, to test the steel of her convictions against the fire of conflict. But the army, in its infinite, bureaucratic wisdom, had looked at her aptitude tests, seen her mechanical skills, and assigned her to the motor pool. To them, she was a logistical asset. To herself, she was a warrior in waiting, a storm cloud on the horizon that everyone else mistook for a shadow. Each morning, as she fired up the diesel engine of her the rumble was a low, constant reminder of the unfulfilled promise she carried within her, a promise waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. That morning began like any other. The Afghan sun was already a blistering hammer in the sky as Maya drove Captain Wallace, a man who had never once used her first name, to a routine briefing at the command post. The air in the MRAP was thick, with the smell of diesel and the captain's cologne, a scent that always seemed out of place in the gritty reality of the war zone. Maya was, as always, invisible, a part of the vehicle's machinery. But as she waited for the captain to finish his meeting, the radio in her cab, usually a monotonous drone of check-ins and status reports, crackled to life with a desperate, frantic energy that made the hair on her arms stand up. All call signs. This is Havoc 6. We are engaged. Repeat. We are heavily engaged. Ambush in the green zone. Grid coordinates 7-9 or -3. The transmission was cut short by a burst of static and the unmistakable, terrifying sound of automatic gunfire. The voice belonged to Sergeant Major Evans, a man known for his unflappable calm. To hear him sound so strained sent a wave of ice through Maya's veins. The radio erupted in a cacophony of frantic calls. Another voice, younger, higher-pitched, screamed, "They're on the high ground. We're pinned down. Taking casualties." Then, a final, chilling transmission before the line went dead. "They're everywhere. God, there." The silence that followed was more terrifying than the screams. A grim-faced operations officer came over the net, his voice tight with controlled urgency. Patrol Havoc 6, a 12-man reconnaissance team, had walked into a complex ambush. Initial estimates put the enemy force at over 30 fighters, well armed and dug into the surrounding cliffs. A quick reaction force was being assembled, but they were a full 20 minutes away. 20 minutes in a firefight like that, 20 minutes was an eternity. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew the men in Havoc 6. There was Master Sergeant Cutler, a gruff but fair leader who'd once tossed her a cold water bottle on a scorching day with a gruff "stay hydrated." Specialist. There was Lieutenant Miller, fresh out of West Point, still trying to prove himself. And there was Corporal Diaz, a wisecracking kid from her own state who always joked about the Montana Mafia men who had only ever seen her as a driver were now fighting for their lives, and time was a luxury they didn't have. Something inside Maya snapped. The quiet, overlooked driver was gone, replaced by the girl who had learned to survive in the unforgiving wilderness of Montana. She didn't think, she acted. She threw the MRAP in gear and sped not towards the motor pool, but towards the base armory. She screeched to a halt in a cloud of dust, leaving the engine running as she vaulted from the cab. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of gun, oil, and steel. Gunnery Sergeant Thorne, a mountain of a man with a chest full of ribbons and a permanent scowl, looked up from his inventory checklist, his expression a mixture of annoyance and surprise. Ramirez, what the hell are you doing here? This isn't a parts depot. I need a saw, Maya said, her voice devoid of its usual softness. It was flat, hard, and resonant with an authority Thorne had never heard from her. Anime 249, and as much ammo as you can spare. Thorne's eyebrows shot up. He took a step towards her, his bulk blocking her path. You're not serious. You're a driver. You're not combat arms, and you're damn sure not authorized to draw a crew-served weapon. Havoc 6 is being slaughtered out there, Maya shot back, her dark eyes locking onto his. There was no pleading in them, only a burning, unyielding conviction. They have minutes, Gunny. Not 20. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm asking for a weapon. For a long moment, the two soldiers stood in a silent standoff. Thorne saw past the grease-stained uniform and the small frame. He saw the fire in her eyes. To some fire AD seen in the eyes of the best soldiers he'd ever served with. He saw a warrior. With a curse under his breath, he stepped aside and pointed to a rack of weapons. Take it, and take all the damn ammo you can carry. Maya didn't hesitate. She grabbed the M249, its weight familiar and comforting in her hands. She hauled for heavy ammo cans, each one packed with hundreds of rounds of 5.56mm ammunition, and loaded them into the back of her MRAP. Thorne's voice followed her out the door. You know you're going to be crucified for this, Ramirez. Better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6, she yelled back, quoting an old infantry saying as she slammed the vehicle into gear. She tore towards the main gate, a lumbering beast of steel and defiance. The guards, seeing her approach at high speed, moved to block the exit. Maya leaned on the horn, her hand hovering over the accelerator. Get out of my way, or I swear to God, I will run you over. The guards, seeing the wild look in her eyes and the machine gun sitting on the passenger seat, made a split-second decision and scrambled to raise the barrier. Maya didn't slow down. She pushed the armored vehicle past the concertina wire and out into the open desert. The plume of smoke on the horizon, her only guide. The terrain outside the wire was a brutal, unforgiving landscape of jagged rocks and deep arroyos. The MRAP, built for roads, protested as Maya forced it across the rough ground, but she pushed it relentlessly, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The smell of cordite and death grew stronger with every meter she covered. When she crested the final rise, the scene below was a vision from hell. The narrow valley was a perfectly designed kill zone. One of Havoc 6's Humvees was a burning, blackened wreck, spewing thick, acrid smoke into the sky. Another was disabled, its tires shredded, its armor pocked with hundreds of bullet holes. The surviving members of the patrol were pinned down behind a small rock outcropping. They returned fire sporadic and desperate. On the cliffs above, dozens of muzzle flashes blinked relentlessly as the insurgents poured a torrent of lead down on the trapped soldiers. Maya didn't drive into the valley. That would have been suicide. Instead, she skidded the MRAP to a halt on the high ground, using the vehicle's massive engine block as a shield. She grabbed the M249, vaulted onto the hood of the truck, and locked the bipod into place. The hot metal of the hood seared through the fabric of her pants, but she didn't feel it. In that moment, she was pure, cold focus. She ripped the charging handle back, chambering around, and scanned the cliffs. The insurgents, confident in their superior numbers and position, were exposed. They were so focused on the trapped patrol below that they didn't see the new threat on their flank. Maya took a steadying breath, just as her father had taught her all those years ago. She exhaled slowly, acquired her first target, and squeezed the trigger. The M249 roared to life, a deafening, visceral sound that was music to Maya's ears. A controlled 5-round burst ripped across the valley, and the insurgent machine gunner who had been pouring fire on the patrol crumpled and fell. Before the other fighters could react, Maya shifted her aim and sent another burst into a cluster of riflemen. They scattered, but not before 2 more of their number went down. Panic and confusion rippled through the enemy ranks. They had no idea where this new, devastating fire was coming from. The base driver, the Grizzly Uber that nobody respected, had just become a one-woman army, and the kill zone had a new queen. The valley erupted into a symphony of chaos. The insurgents, finally realizing the new threat, redirected their fire towards Maya's position. Bullets pinged and ricocheted off the armored hide of the MRAP, the sound like angry hornets. But the vehicle held, and Maya, protected by its bulk, remained focused on her deadly work. She was a study in calm, lethal precision. She didn't just spray and pray. She fired in controlled, disciplined bursts, conserving ammunition, making every round count. Her movements were fluid and economical as she reloaded a fresh belt of ammunition, her hands moving with a sureness that belied her years. Down in the valley, the trapped soldiers of Havoc 6 were in a state of shock. Lieutenant Miller, peering over his rock cover, saw the MRAP on the ridge and the lone figure behind the machine gun. "Who the hell is that?" he yelled over the din. His radio operator, hunched low beside him, shouted back, "Sir, I think that's Ramirez." The driver. Miller's mind struggled to process the information. Ramirez, the quiet girl from the motor pool. It seemed impossible, but then a voice, calm and steady, came over their radio frequency. It was Maya. "Havoc 6. This is Thesis, Rent. I'm providing suppressive fire on your 9 o'clock. Use my cover to advance and break contact." The lieutenant's shock gave way to a surge of adrenaline. "You heard her," he roared at his men. "Move! Move! Move!" Emboldened by the relentless stream of fire pouring from the ridge, Havoc 6 They laid down their own base of fire and began a leapfrogging retreat, moving from cover to cover. Maya's M249 became the conductor of the battle. When a group of insurgents tried to flank the retreating patrol, she shifted her fire, cutting them off and sending them scrambling for cover. When an enemy machine gun opened up, she silenced it with a long, sustained burst. She was a force of nature, a whirlwind of brass and fury that had single-handedly turned the tide of the battle. The insurgents, who had been on the verge of victory, were now in disarray, caught between the retreating patrol and the Angel of Death on the ridge. Just as it seemed the tide had turned, a new threat emerged. An ADPH gunner using the chaos as cover scrambled into a firing position on a rocky ledge. He shouldered the launcher, aiming directly at Maya's exposed position on the hood of the MRAP. A direct hit would be catastrophic. From the valley below, Master Sergeant Cutler saw the danger. "Ramirez? RPG. You're 11 o'clock. He screamed into his radio. Maya didn't need the warning. Her eyes, constantly scanning the battlefield, had already picked up the movement. In a single, fluid motion, she swiveled the M249, the heavy barrel swinging effortlessly. She didn't have time to aim properly. She fired from the hip, a stream of tracer rounds streaking across the valley. The RPG gunner was stitched across the chest, the rocket firing harmlessly into the sky as he fell backward off the ledge. The sight of their anti-armor weapon being so casually neutralized seemed to break the remaining insurgents' will to fight. A small group of them broke cover and tried to regroup for a final, desperate charge. Maya saw her moment. Her ammo can was running low, and she knew she couldn't stay on the exposed hood of the MRAP forever. In a move of almost unbelievable audacity, she unclipped the M249 from its bipod, held it into her arms, and leaped off the vehicle. She hit the ground running, charging down the slope towards the enemy, the heavy machine gun roaring at her hip. The insurgents, who had been expecting a static, defensive position, were completely unprepared for a one-woman frontal assault. They froze, their eyes wide with disbelief and terror. Maya closed the distance in seconds, the M249 spitting fire and death. The 5 remaining fighters were cut down in a hail of point-blank fire before they could even raise their weapons. And then, silence. The sudden, deafening quiet of the valley was broken only by the crackle of the burning Humvee and the ragged breathing of the survivors. The ambush so close to succeeding, had been utterly and completely shattered. The reason for its collapse stood in the middle of the valley, a slight figure holding a still-smoking machine gun, surrounded by the carnage she had wrought. As the dust settled and the quick reaction force could name it, Hiko Sivan finally arrived. They found a scene of disbelief. The 12 members of Havoc 6 were battered and bruised, but miraculously all alive. The valley floor was littered with the bodies of the enemy, and in the middle of it all stood Specialist Maya Ramirez, looking small and almost out of place amidst the devastation. The soldiers of Eco 7 and Havoc 6 stared at her with a mixture of awe and confusion. This was the girl who drove the MRAP, the one they called Wrench and Grizzly Uber. This was the soldier they had never truly seen. Master Sergeant Cutler, a man not given to displays of emotion, walked up to her, his face a mask of grudging respect. "Ramirez," he said, his voice rough. You did good, kid. Real good. I never would have expected." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Lieutenant Miller was more direct. After a quick head count of the enemy dead, he approached Maya, his helmet in his hands. "We counted 32 enemy Kier," he said, his voice filled with a reverence that was completely new. "Our intel suggests you're personally responsible for at least 15 of them. You saved our lives, all of us." The reality of what she had done began to sink in, and with it came a cold knot of dread in Maya's stomach. She had disobeyed direct orders. She had abandoned her post. She had stolen a weapon and left the base without authorization. By every rule in the book, she was facing a court-martial and a prison sentence. She braced herself for the inevitable punishment, but Miller's next words stunned her. He keyed his radio, his voice ringing with pride. "Grizzly says, this is Havoc 6. Be advised, the QRF is on site. The threat has been neutralized, and we're bringing home a hero." The return to Firebase Grizzly was surreal. Word of what had happened had spread like wildfire across the base's radio nets. As the convoy of battered vehicles limped through the main gate, it seemed as if the entire population of the base had turned out to see them. Soldiers, infantrymen, mechanics, cooks, clerks lined the dusty road, not cheering, but standing in a silent, awestruck tribute. They weren't looking at the returning patrol. They were looking at the small specialist in the driver's seat of the lead MRAP. As Maya brought the vehicle to a stop in front of the command post, the base commander, Colonel Davis, was there to meet her. A formidable man with a reputation for being a strict disciplinarian. Davis's face was unreadable. Maya's heart sank. This was it. The public dressing down before the official charges were filed. She climbed down from the cab and snapped to attention, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere over the colonel's shoulder. "Specialist Ramirez," he began, his voice booming across the silent crowd. "You are guilty of numerous violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You abandoned your post. You disobeyed a direct order. You stole a crew-served weapon and left the space without authorization. Be all right, I should have you in chains." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. Maya braced herself. "But you also," the colonel continued, his voice softening slightly, "saved the lives of 12 American soldiers and single-handedly destroyed an enemy force that outnumbered them 3-1. Your actions, while unorthodox, were heroic." He took a step closer, his eyes meeting hers. "Therefore, instead of a court-martial, I am personally recommending you for the Silver Star. Furthermore, I just got off the phone with SOCOM. It seems the 75th Ranger Regiment has an opening in their next selection class. They've requested you by name." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The 75th Ranger Regiment was the stuff of legends, the Army's elite. For a driver from the motor pool to be handpicked for their selection process was unheard of. Maya could only stare at the colonel, speechless, as the weight of his words washed over her. The days that followed were a blur. The entire culture of Firebase Grizzly seemed to shift on its axis. The soldiers who had once dismissed her as Wrench now went out of their way to talk to her, to shake her hand, their eyes filled with a newfound respect. Master Sergeant Cutler, the man she had saved, found her in the mess hall and, in front of everyone, rendered a sharp, formal salute. "I was wrong about you, Ramirez," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're one hell of a soldier." The most poignant moment came from Gunnery Sergeant Thorne. He found her in the motor pool, where she was, by habit, running diagnostics on her MRAP. He was carrying the M249 she had used in the ambush. It was freshly cleaned and oiled, the steel gleaming in the afternoon sun. He presented it to her. "But first, this belongs to you now," he said gruffly. Maya looked closer and saw that a small brass plate had been affixed to the stock. Engraved on it were the date of the ambush and a simple inscription, "Doble Rend." Keene said the gesture brought tears to Maya's eyes. This weapon, the tool of her defiance, was now a symbol of her acceptance. She was no longer invisible. She had forced them all to see her. Not for the job she had been assigned, but for the warrior she truly was. The name they had given her to keep her in a box wrench had been transformed into a title of honor. A name that would be spoken with reverence in the stories told on that base for years to come. 3 days later, Maya stood by a Black Hawk helicopter, her duffel bag at her feet, ready to leave for Ranger Assessment and Selection Program, or RASP. The entire contingent of Havoc 6 and Eco 7 was there to see her off. Lieutenant Miller and Master Sergeant Cutler stepped forward. "We couldn't let you leave without this," Miller said, holding out a small, embroidered patch. It was their patrol's insignia, a snarling grizzly bear with the motto, "Havoc reigns." "You're one of us now," Cutler added, his voice gruff. "An honorary member of Havoc 6. As Maya took the patch, a profound sense of belonging washed over her. It was a feeling she had craved since the day she'd first put on the uniform. She had earned her place not through a job title or a rank, but through blood, courage, and a shared experience of survival. She was no longer just a driver. She was a sister in arms, a warrior who had stood with them when everything was on the line. The blistering heat of Afghanistan was replaced by the humid, oppressive air of Fort Benning, Georgia. The first person Maya met upon arriving at the Ranger Selection Barracks was a master sergeant with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and a chest full of medals that told the story of a lifetime at war. He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her small frame, a skeptical sneer playing on his lips. "Ramirez, is it?" He drawled, his voice like gravel. "Read your file. Big hero back in the stand." "But this ain't the stand, specialist. This is the gateway to the regiment. You think you have what it takes to stand with the best? You don't look like much." The old Maya would have shrunk under that gaze. The old Maya would have mumbled an apology and looked at the ground. But that Maya was gone, left behind in a dusty valley in Helmand Province. She met the Master Sergeant's hard stare with one of her own. Her back straight, her chin up. "With all due respect, Master Sergeant," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm not here to prove I belong. I already know I do. I'm here to give you the chance to figure it out." For a moment, the Master Sergeant's stony expression didn't change. Then, the barest hint of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was a flicker of respect, an acknowledgement of the steel he saw in her eyes. "Is that so?" he said. "We'll see about that. Fall in, Ranger candidate." A specialist, Maya Ramirez, took a place in the formation. A new life stretching out before her. She knew she carried 3 things with her that would see her through any trial to come. The memory of the weight of the engraved M249 in her hands, the Havoc 6 patch tucked safely in her pocket, and the unshakable, undeniable knowledge that a warrior isn't defined by their size, their gender, or the job title someone else gives them. A warrior is defined by their actions in the crucible of conflict, by the choices they make when everything is on the line. And sometimes, she thought with a quiet, fierce pride, the most dangerous person on the battlefield is the one nobody bothered to see coming. This story is a powerful reminder that our true potential is not dictated by the labels others place on us. Maya was Shayna's, just a driver, but inside, she was a warrior waiting for her moment. It teaches us that courage, skill, and determination are not confined to specific roles or appearances. True strength lies in our character and our willingness to act when it matters most. In our own lives, how often do we underestimate people, or even ourselves, based on superficial judgments? Maya's journey encourages us to look beyond the surface, to recognize the hidden potential in others, and to have the courage to defy expectations and forge our own path. What do you think? Have you ever felt underestimated or overlooked in your own life, only to surprise everyone, including yourself, with what you were capable of? What holds us back from seeing the true potential in the people around us every day? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for spending this time with me. I wish you all good health, strength in your own battles, and the courage to be the hero of your own story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that inspire and empower.